Okay, thank you so much for being here. We're continuing to look at the Integrity Commission report in respect of Prime Minister Andrew Holness's statutory declarations. And we are picking up with Imperium's Barita account. Now, Imperium, if you recall, is a company that's wholly owned by Prime Minister Holness. And Imperium is a company that was formed after Mr. Holness said he wound up the St. Lucia-based company ADMAT and transferred the assets that were held by ADMAT into Imperium. So we are picking up now on page 81 of the report if you want to follow along there for yourself. So this was the point at which Mr. Holness had been asked about source of funds for the Imperium account, which was held at Barita. So the director said, having reviewed Mr. Holness's explanation, he deemed it necessary to look at the statement that had been provided by the officer at Barita in relation to shares held in Imperium's name. So the statement said that Mr. Holness acquired about 50,000 BIL shares on December 21, 2020, and then on March 16, 2021, the statement from Barita showed that Mr. Holness sold 192,000 BIL shares. Now, because of this discrepancy, the director said he asked for an explanation from Barita. Barita told him that the allotment of over 140,000 units of shares to the client fell within the purview of the Jamaica Stock Exchange, given that the security was acquired via a public offer. Those shares were then placed directly on the client's Jamaica Central Securities Depository as required in the APO process, therefore did not go through a brokerage order, and the allotted amount is communicated to BIL for the units to be reflected on the client's equity account at Barita. And he said basically the significance of that explanation was that Barita did not have the information on the unit price of the shares or the source of funding for the shares that had been bought in this way. He said that a statement from the Jamaica Stock Exchange confirmed that an allotment of over 141,000 Barita shares had been issued on September 25, 2020 to Mr. Holness. The unit price or total value was not stated because the Jamaica Central Securities Depository only records the number of shares allotted. And the director said because of information gaps, he went back to Barita for more information, which was provided, and that showed that Mr. Holness had applied to purchase a total of 192,300 shares at an offer price of $52 per share, and that he received over 141,000 shares on September 25, 2020, and the other remaining approximately 50,000 shares on December 21, 2020, with a monetary value of $9.9 million. The purchase of the shares was funded by transfers from BNS and JN Bank. And checks showed that transfers were in fact made from accounts held by Mr. Holness at BNS and JN Bank. Now, the director said he found it necessary to highlight the finding from looking at Mr. Holness's JN Bank account. The transaction history shows that between May and July 2020, 20 deposits classified as cardless cash deposits totaling $4.5 million were made to this account. On September 16, 2020, a withdrawal and RTGS withdrawal of over $6 million was made from the account. Now, RTGS means real-time gross settlement. It's an acronym used in the banking system. It's a mechanism for transferring funds from one bank to another on a real time and on what is called a gross basis. The director says the report is in possession of further evidence from the duty authorized officer at JN Bank which explains that cardless cash deposits are deposits made through automated teller machines by members and their agents. The evidence further shows that if the deposits are made by an agent of the member, meaning the person who owns a bank account, the depositor's identity is unknown, as was the case with the deposits made to Mr. Holness's accounts. On February 28, 2024, the director put certain questions to Mr. Holness concerning these deposits, and Mr. Holness explained in his response that the deposits were made by bearers. Now, the question was, what was the source of funds classified as cardless cash deposits? The answer was that it was a reimbursement from Norman Brown, a shareholder of Estate Bridge, in relation to preparatory expenditure undertaken on the Waycliffe development. 2. Source of funds, answer, income from rental of property at Mona. Question 3. What was the purpose of the deposits listed above classified as cardless cash deposits? Answer: 1. Rental of property at Mona. 2. Pursuant to a land development agreement which stated that the developer, which is Estate Bridge Holdings, had agreed to pay to the owner, that's ADMAT, the sum of $6 million upon signing, to be apportioned as follows: $4 million compensation for expenses undertaken by the owner to prepare preliminary drawings, subdivide the land, preparing design of sewage system, legal fees and other costs, to apply to the Supreme Court to modify restrictive covenants. $2 million was an advance from the developer to the owner to be refunded upon transfer to the owner. The next segment is entitled Investment in Bond. The evidence from NCB Capital Markets indicates that Mr. Holness acquired a bond on September 2, 2019 at a cost of $94,000 US. Mr. Holness was asked to indicate to the Commission the source of funding for the placement of the bond, and this was the explanation provided, or a part of it. Mr. Holness said during 2019 he encashed the total balance that had accrued in his US dollar repo account that had been generated from interest payments from bonds. That account was at Stocks and Securities Limited. He said, along with drawing down on his bank balances in US dollars and Jamaican dollars, that was to make an investment of US $94,000 in corporate bonds through NCB Capital Markets. He said his source of cash and income were detailed in attachments to his 2019 report. He includes an excerpt that says at year-end 2019 bank balances declined by 50% or 10.4 million Jamaican dollars. Substantial cash outlay was used to liquidate the outstanding balance on construction liabilities of $18 million and to purchase corporate bonds for $94,000 US. The director said he then examined the relevant bank statements. He said when asked about the source of funding for the bond, the officer at NCB Capital Markets indicated that it was, quote, undetermined, currently being investigated. The evidence from NCB Capital Markets indicates that on September 4 and 5, 2019, a total of over $204,000 US was received by Capital Markets to establish an NFE 11% 2036 bond with 94,000 units and NFE 8.25% 2034 bond with 110,000 units. The details can be seen on the table that you're now seeing on your screen. The evidence shows that the NFE 11% 2036 bond was established in Mr. Holness's name, and the NFE 8.25% 2034 bond in the name Positive Jamaica Foundation, and was subsequently established by another investment house. The director highlights that the evidence from the company's office indicates that Mr. Holness was a director of Positive Jamaica Foundation, a charitable entity up to December 1, 2021, The director also highlights that the scope of the investigation did not include the accounts or any assets held by Positive Jamaica Foundation. The director notes that Mr. Holness's account with the largest balance during 2019 maintained that balance until December 27, 2019, when a transfer of $18 million was made to ARC Manufacturing. In an attachment to Mr. Holness's 2019 statutory declaration submitted to the Integrity Commission on March 31, 2020, he explained that that payment was made to clear outstanding amounts for construction material in relation to the Shenstone property. The evidence further indicates that the proceeds of the bond in question plus interest was repaid and transferred to Imperium's account on December 29, 2020 and invested as a repo. That's a financial instrument. Now, following that, the director said he deemed it necessary to examine the 2019 statutory declaration submitted by Mr. Holness, which reflects an investment of $94,000 with NCB Capital Markets. He gave the source of funds for this investment as accumulated bank balances and withdrawals from investments held with SSL in the name ADMAT Incorporated. The director is in possession of evidence from SSL showing that a check withdrawal was made on September 2, 2019 of just over $30,000 from a cash account held with SSL in the name ADMAT Incorporated. The transaction information didn't show who the check was being paid to. The director further examined bank statements received from BNS. It was observed that a wire transfer was made from Mr. Holness's US dollar account on September 4, 2019 to Capital Markets of over $31,000. The director also observed a transaction classified as Forex debit from another of Mr. Holness's BNS accounts of $1.1 million on September 4, 2019. He says it's noteworthy that no other transfers to NCB Capital Markets were observed from Mr. Holness's BNS accounts between the end of August and September 4, 2019, around the time the $94,000 bond was purchased. He says based on all of that, he is only able to attribute just over $30,000 and $31,000 to the source of funds identified by Mr. Holness in his explanations in relation to the $94,000. The director says the over $204,000 received by Capital Markets between the 4th and 5th of September 2019 would have sufficiently covered the bond placed by Mr. Holness, but the source of funding identified by the bank did not totally support Mr. Holness's explanation that he previously provided. This raised questions, says the report, as to whether his personal funds were commingled with the funds of the charity Positive Jamaica Foundation. Mr. Holness was therefore asked to provide more information as to how he funded the purchase of that bond. So this was Mr. Holness's explanation. He said the $94,000 bond purchase price was incorrectly assigned to Andrew Holness by NCB Capital Markets. The correct allocation to him, he said, is over $61,000. He said the correction has been addressed by NCB Capital Markets. He said the specific source of funds for the over $61,000 is as followed. Over $31,000 from a BNS Jamaican dollar savings account converted to US dollars, and then from a BNS US dollar savings account. He said another over $30,000 came from an SSL account in the name of ADMAT Incorporated. So in this segment, Mr. Holness is saying the bond was put entirely in his name. He is saying that was an error and that in fact just over $61,000 should have been in his name only. The director says he made further inquiries of NCB Capital Market and he got a further statement. This says as follows. Subsequent to their submission to the Integrity Commission, several telephone conversations with the client have revealed that the allocations for the purchase of the bonds in 2019 were not as desired by the client and should have been apportioned as follows. And then the table that you're seeing on the screen is showing what Capital Markets is now saying the allocation should have been for the bond, with some going towards Andrew Holness and the rest going towards Positive Jamaica Foundation. So Capital Markets now says that the total amount of over 61,000 US dollars was to be used to settle the NFE 11% 2036 bond purchase in the name of Andrew Holness and over 142,000 US dollars for the NFE 8.25% 2034 bond purchase, Positive Jamaica Limited. They say it should not have been 94,000 US dollars in the name of Andrew Holness and 110,000 US dollars for Positive Jamaica Foundation. They say as such, over 32,000 US dollars of the initial deposit should have been allocated to Positive Jamaica Foundation. They said instructions regarding this allocation of funds were apparently received verbally by Capital Markets officers who are no longer with the company. As such, the amounts indicated on the bond purchase agreements dated September 2, 2019, previously submitted to the Integrity Commission in the name of Mr. Andrew Holness and in the name of Positive Jamaica Foundation were used to settle the bonds. They said all investments on account 750768 in the name of Andrew Holness were then transferred to an account in the name of Imperium Investment Holdings. And that was in the amount of over 108,000 US dollars. NCB Capital Markets said they have since, with the assistance of the client, taken action on the account in the name of Imperium Investments to allocate the funds to the accounts for which the client requested. And they said they were in the process of calculating additional coupon payments attributable to Positive Jamaica Foundation. The director said, having got that statement and noticed what appeared to be inconsistencies with further statements, the director summoned and examined under oath 4 officers from NCB Capital Markets, and 3 of those officers gave written statements after being heard. During the course of the hearing, the director said what he was trying to find out was the policies and procedures around the purchase of bonds, the manner in which client instructions are given and received by NCB Capital Markets, as well as whether there was an error on the part of NCB Capital Markets as indicated by Mr. Holness in his July 16, 2024 response to the director. In a statement dated August 22, 2024, one of the officers said the following. He said, as the account manager of the Imperium account, he reached out to the client via their usual communication method, WhatsApp, to verify the source of funds for the purchase of 94,000 units of the bond that was purchased in September 2019 in the name of Mr. Holness. Following instructions from a person whose name has been redacted here, who was trying to locate the source of funds, he said he reached out to Mr. Holness via WhatsApp call and messages in 2024 to assist with providing the source of funds for the bond purchase. On May 9 and May 17, initial contact attempts were made to Mr. Holness to request source of funds, but he was unable to produce a source of funds. June 7, email reminder sent to Mr. Holness. He said Mr. Holness has WhatsApp feature disappearing messages activated for 7 days. So his messages would have disappeared and can't be produced for evidence. But he says he has attached a screenshot of his message folder showing that disappearing messages are turned on, and consequently that doesn't actually show the messages between them. On June 8 and June 9, Mr. Holness contacted him via WhatsApp call indicating that he was trying to locate the source of funds. June 11, a telephone meeting with Mr. Holness, the person giving the statement, and his manager. During that meeting, Mr. Holness clarified the connection between the Andrew Holness account, now Imperium, and the Positive Jamaica Foundation, along with the bond purchases from both accounts. Now, he said then that the payments of $31,000 and $30,000, totaling over $61,000, were intended for the bond purchase in his personal account, while over $142,000 was for Positive Jamaica Limited. However, the bond settlement values as per the bond purchase agreement were recorded as $94,000 for Andrew Holness and $110,000 for Positive Jamaica Foundation. June 13, a following email sent. The following documents were provided to the client: bond purchase agreement, transactional statements, dividend mandate, copy of the checks, the source of funds for the bond purchases of the NFE bonds. Then the statement went on to say, both Andrew Holness and Positive Jamaica Foundation interest payments were made to Mr. Holness's accounts initially, which totaled over $20,000 from October 9, 2019 to September 22, 2020. The bond was called, and on September 22, 2020, the principal payments plus interest was credited to Mr. Holness's account. Following email correspondence on October 21, 2020, adjustments were made to the account. Positive Jamaica Foundation account was credited over $121,000. On June 28, 2024, the current NFE bond was sold, and an amount of $39,000 was transferred to Positive Jamaica Foundation, and an additional over $4,000, he said, is now to be transferred to Positive Jamaica Foundation pending approval from his manager and from Mr. Holness. He said the bond was purchased in accordance with instructions provided by the client as set out in the bond purchase agreement. He said NCB Capital Markets acted based on the written instructions provided by Mr. Holness. Mr. Holness only indicated in their June 2024 communication that the allocation of funds between his personal account and Positive Jamaica Foundation did not align with his original intentions. Mr. Holness indicated that the persons who were handling the bond were X and Y on June 8 and 9 via WhatsApp calls. He did not indicate that any of the parties took verbal instructions from the bond. He said it is not standard practice for NCB Capital Markets to take verbal instructions, and they have a client account opening agreement and operations manual that speak to that. The director says the explanation from Mr. Holness is not in line with the evidence from NCB Capital Markets. He says Mr. Holness declared the $94,000 bond in his 2019 and September 2020 statutory declaration. Mr. Holness also provided the Commission with an explanation as to the source of funding in respect of the $94,000 bond. The director further highlights the following. The bond purchase agreement duly signed by Mr. Holness clearly states the value of the instrument to be $94,000. B. NCB Capital Markets has indicated it only takes written instructions from clients in respect of bond instruments. C. Mr. Holness is presented with statements of account on a regular basis which clearly show the value of the instrument, that is $94,000 in addition to interest. Mr. Holness had not before June 2024 indicated that his intentions were not as documented in the bond purchase agreement. D. NCB Capital Markets has indicated that the bond was called early and the proceeds and principal transferred to Mr. Holness's holding company Imperium on September 22, 2020. No corrections can now therefore be made to the bond instrument as it was originally crafted. It no longer exists. The actions taken by NCB Capital Markets on behalf of Mr. Holness on June 24, 2024 were therefore based on fresh instructions from him and not a correction as he stated in his July 16, 2024 response. The evidence indicates that on August 21, 2020, adjustments were made to Mr. Holness's account on the basis that funds belonging to Positive Jamaica Foundation were erroneously deposited in said account. This transaction was reversed on October 26, 2020. There was no indication at this or any other stage that the $94,000 bond was incorrect prior to the director's inquiries in June 2024. F. The full proceeds of the $94,000 bond, including the about $32,000, which is now being said to belong to Positive Jamaica Foundation, were transferred to Imperium and reinvested by that entity. In other words, the portion belonging to Positive Jamaica Foundation formed part of Imperium's assets for over 3 years and was appropriated by that entity as it deemed appropriated. The funds were only remitted to Positive Jamaica Foundation after inquiries were made by the Director of Investigation. And he ends the segment by saying, having regard to the discrepancies identified in Mr. Holness's July 16, 2024 response, the evidence of the officers at NCB Capital Markets and the representations made in his 2019 and 2020 statutory declarations regarding the bond, the Director finds that an investigation surrounding the operations of Positive Jamaica Foundation and the use of any funds held by this entity is warranted. Gonna leave it there for today. We're now at page 100 of the 171-page report, so we should be able to finish in another couple of videos. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Dionne Jackson Miller. I'll see you next time.